Welcome to the Nerd Journey Podcast. Our goal is to help you, the technology professional, accelerate your career progression, increase your job satisfaction, and be more effective in your existing role.
We want to bring listeners like you the career advice we wish we'd been given earlier in our careers.
I'm John White, at VJourneyman on Twitter, sharing co-host duties with Nick Cordy at NetworkNerd_.
We're two former IT operations guys who have moved on to pre-sales roles with technology vendors. We have our opinions, but we also like to highlight the journeys of others and see what we can learn from them.
We'd also like to ask for your feedback to make this a conversation, not a one-way broadcast. Email us at nerdjourneypodcast@gmail.com or DM us at nerdjourney on Twitter. So come join us on our nerd journey.
Let's take a trip. Episode 280. How would you react if a manager you loved working for suddenly had to leave the company? And more importantly, what would the impact be on that manager? As we prepare to share part 3 of Marni Coffey's story this week, I can tell you that Marni Coffey was that manager. But let's catch you up on what's happened so far before we dive deeper. In part 1 of our discussion with Marni in episode 278, you heard about her early experience in the tech industry as a developer and then as a consultant. Marni also shared with us how she discovered her greatest skill is empathy. In part 2 of our discussion with Marni in episode 279, she recounted making the leap from individual contributor to tech lead or team lead. And Marni made a conscious decision to develop other people. And you can see this ring true in the way she talks about having career conversations with her people on the team that she manages now at McKesson in that same discussion. And then we talked a little bit about change management at a global organization, what you need to consider when making changes to global systems. This week, as the trilogy comes to an end in part 3 of our discussion with Marni, you'll get to hear more about the events that led to Marni getting the role at McKesson. She, like a number of our other guests, was impacted by a layoff event. And when you're someone who's worked for the same company for many years, what is the impact to you as a person when that happens? And if you're a manager, what is the impact on your team if you were to be laid off? You'll get to hear all those details. Marni will share how her job search went once that event happened, the support she got from people around her, and what the interview process was like to get her current job. Let's get you to part 3 and the conclusion of our discussions with Marni Coffey.
Can you talk a little bit about your decision to join McKesson? It's not like you went through your life, saying, I use all these McKesson products, the way that you had that same connection with Pepsi. So what was that process of evaluating the organization, saying, hey, this is what I bring. Is that going to be valued at this organization? Is it going to be magnified, or is it going to be suppressed? Because I imagine that had to be part of your decision-making process.
Again, it's the way things just happened in an order that landed me there. I knew who I was. At Pepsi, I finally knew who I was in that people manager role. I knew it was important to me, what I wanted to do, and I knew I wanted to elevate people. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to make them successful and get them where they were going. I wanted to be the one to work on that employee experience and navigate across a global company to get those things done for our employees. Not just my employees, your employees, their employees, all of the employees. I want them all to have a good experience. And I know that sounds like some utopian wish, but that's what I mean by continuous improvement. You're never there. You just keep doing the next thing to make it better for them. So I knew I wanted that at Pepsi. And we went through a global transformation at Pepsi, and I was laid off. My husband too, he worked there too. And Nick knew me then because he reached out and he said, hey, I heard about all the things going on at Pepsi. Are you impacted? And I replied, I am impacted. I'm here for 4 more days. And then I'm going to take my severance package and decide what my next move is going to be. I had not been hunting for a job in so long, I didn't even know where to start. And Nick helped me with my resume, because I had no idea what to do. I was like, hey, will you look at this resume? I think it's a disaster, but maybe you can give me some pointers. And he gave me a lot of really good feedback, and I used it. I went out and I started up my LinkedIn account again. I really thought I was going to retire with Pepsi, so I thought I was just done with this job hunting stuff. I started up LinkedIn. I reached out to people that I knew, and they helped me get my resume up to date and to get it in a format that's accepted today. It's so different. And then to get LinkedIn updated. And then I started my job hunt. And I interviewed with almost every opportunity that I got to interview. I interviewed just for the practice. At Nick's suggestion, by the way, he was like, you should interview even if you don't want the job, just for the practice. And I was like, oh, I'm going to go into these interviews like you're just practice. And then I went in and I was more relaxed that way, thinking, well, this is just practice. This is probably not the job I take. I will say that there were a number of companies I interviewed with that I knew after the first interview, this is not the place for me. I'm not passionate about what they do, and I'm not sure I like this culture. I had one interview where they had me on camera and they had me take this test, and I swear it covered the entire spectrum of IT. I was like, I don't know what you guys are looking for, but the propeller on my beanie is not that big. I cannot pass this test. I knew I didn't want to work there because of the interview style. They just sat there and watched me take a test. And I turned down the next interview. I didn't want to go to it.
I would just assume that the job is a series of proctored exams, right?
It was unpleasant. They didn't take the time to find out who I am and what I'm looking for, which I think is an important part of interviewing. You need to know who you're interviewing. Are they a motivational fit for you? I know that's a buzzword. Are they going to be happy with you? Are they going to fit in with you? Are you going to be happy with them? And those are things that you size up in an interview. And it's a small space of time to try to get to that. But there are people who are very good at it. Now, before McKesson, I interviewed with Progressive Insurance. I was so excited. I was on my 5th interview. I was so excited. I'm going to get this job. I'm going to get to meet Flo. It's going to be awesome. And I really wanted the job. It was me and one other person. In the end, talent acquisition called me and they decided to go with him. He explained why they went with him. It was nothing personal. I was a great fit, but he had more recent experience with developers, whereas my most recent experience was with operations. And he said, I want to keep you in mind for something in the future because I think you'd be a great fit at the company, even if this position didn't work out. And I said, well, I think that would be great. Did I secretly hope that this guy turned out to be a huge mistake? Yes, I secretly hoped he was going to be a huge mistake. They were going to have to call me back and I was going to go work at Progressive. But I think it happened for a reason. I really do. I kind of feel like it just kind of flowed because after that, I was so bummed out about getting so excited about that job and not getting it that I was determined not to let myself be too overly excited and giddy about something else. And I just relaxed a little. My husband helped because he said, hey, either you get a job or we go to Hawaii again. Let's go to Hawaii on a vacation. I think you could use it. And I was like, okay, we have no jobs. We're going to go to Hawaii, but okay. I figured, well, it's a win-win situation. Either we're going to go lounge on a beach for a week or I'm going to have another opportunity. Well, McKesson got back to me. It had been 3 months since I applied for that job and talent acquisition called me. They asked about my experience with managed service providers. I had the opportunity to work with 3 at the same time at Pepsi. We had 3 managed service providers I got to work with. So that I fit that bill. I kind of replied back to it like, yes, I have this experience, but it was it wasn't overly enthusiastic because I was still kind of upset about not getting that other opportunity. A couple weeks passed. I went to Colorado to see my son and we just stayed up there for about a week. And then while I was there, they contacted me again and said, hey, the senior director would like to interview you. And I said, okay. So I got back home. I interviewed with the senior director, loved her immediately, just loved her immediately. We clicked. We're not the same person, but we complemented each other, I thought. Really liked her. More than anything, it was just a good conversation. And that's kind of how I handled all those interviews with McKesson. It was a good conversation. I felt the same way about Progressive, but in this way, I was just looking to have a good conversation. I was still sort of thinking about it like, you're just practice. And so I could stay nice and calm. Then they had me interview with two directors that were on teams that worked with the team I would manage. And I liked both of them. And we had very candid conversations about my experience and how I feel about things. The next interview I had was with the senior vice president, which is a big jump. And I met with her. She was very nice. I had glitches during the interview where I got booted out of the interview and had to jump back in. I was on hotel Wi-Fi. It was not good. I had to turn off my camera in the middle of the interview, but we still kept it light. We had a nice conversation. Then they had me interview with the CIO and VP of Operations for Transformation.
This just kept on escalating and escalating.
It did. And so I wasn't even sure why I was interviewing with all these people, but I interviewed with her and it was a nice, relaxed interview. We talked. They were all very different people too. I loved that because they were all so different and they all brought something different into conversations. So I interviewed with her, and with her, it was a real familiar conversation because I had been in operations. It was a much easier conversation to have with her about standardization across your global enterprise and things like that. After that, I'm interviewed last with the vice president who was between the SVP I had already interviewed with and the senior director. And I really liked her too. And one thing that made me really appreciate her was in the middle of our interview, we were talking about upgrading a system, and if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And I said, but it will eventually break. You have to be ahead of that. You've got to continuously improve. You can never set it and forget it in today's world. And she goes, oh, wait a minute. I'm writing that down. And I thought it was so cool that this vice president who had it all together was writing down something I said. And so if nothing else, I felt really good about myself after those interviews. And I thought, well, if the only purpose was that I have my confidence built back up and I feel good about my abilities and my skills and my talents, this was worth it. I still had not gone out there to really read about McKesson because I didn't think they were going to offer me the job. It was in finance. I had no experience in finance whatsoever. And I was like, there's no way they'll offer me this because, I got edged out just because of the kind of team I led last at Progressive. When they called me back to tell me they wanted to offer me the job, I was very surprised. That morning is when I found the McKesson socks in my drawer and I was like, oh, hey, would you look at that? And I went out and looked at what they did right after I found those socks because I was like, they make these socks? And so I went out and read about them and I was like, oh, this is an awesome company. And then they called me with the offer. And I was like, wow, if that didn't all happen just perfect in the perfect order, it just seemed like it was meant to be. It was a great experience overall. It was ups and downs interviewing when I hadn't interviewed in so long, but having so many people willing to step in and help me, people I'd built relationships with. See, even after you're no longer at your company, all those relationships that you build pay off. And Nick and I didn't work for the same company. He worked for the company that offered us a service, and we just knew each other that way. And he still helped me with my resume. He helped me with LinkedIn. I had other people helping me with job leads and interview tips. I was very humbled by how many people wanted to be part of my journey, to elevate me on my journey, to develop me and develop my skills while I really needed it. So it was so awesome. I was open and willing to take it. So I really appreciated all of the help that I got. it showed me the power of those relationships that you build.
Do you mind if I ask if in any of the interviews you went through, did they ask you specifically about the separation from your former employer and that situation? And if so, what would your guidance be on how to handle that for other people who may have gone through something similar?
Yeah, they did. And I would say be honest, but be gracious. I know it's really hard not to take it personally when you get laid off. But most of the time when you get laid off, that decision has absolutely nothing to do with your value, your contribution to the company. And even though they told me that, my senior director was the one who had to deliver the news to me. And he said, this has nothing to do with your skills or what you've done for the company. You've done a lot for PepsiCo. It's a business decision. It's a business course they're going to take. And this is part of it. But it has nothing to do with you. It's hard to believe that in the moment. It's hard not to take it personally. It's hard not to say things like they'll be sorry, And it's hard not to immediately go out and buy a Coca-Cola when that happens, But I didn't. I've been a Pepsi girl my whole life, so I didn't do that. I continue to drink my Pure Leaf iced tea, which is my drink of choice these days. It's tough not to take it personally, but try to remember it has nothing to do with you as a person or your value. It has more to do with someone's high up decision for the course of the company. And if that vision no longer includes you, you don't want to be there. You want to go and have an opportunity to do something better, right? And there are better things out there. There's a better fit for you out there. By the time they made that decision at Pepsi, I was already kind of feeling like I wasn't being able to contribute as much as I wanted to. My ideas weren't being elevated as much as I wanted them to be. Well, it wasn't really part of the business plan, right? So it had nothing to do with how good my ideas were. It just wasn't who they wanted to be anymore. It was just time to move on to the next thing, time to find something better to do, time to grow again. And if you haven't looked for a job in a long time, it's tough to know where you are. Find people that will help you navigate that process, help you with your resume. They'll tell you what to expect in interviews. And while you're filling out your LinkedIn profile, toot your own horn. Reflect back on all that time you had with that company and all the really amazing things that you did. You and other people together moved mountains. You did amazing things. You did things that no one thought you could do. Maybe they didn't even ask you to do it. You just did it. Take those skills and put them down on paper. Take those accomplishments and put them down on paper. And even if there's not room for them on your resume, put them on a note and stick it right there on your desktop because you're going to talk about that in your interview. They're going to ask you about a time that you had to do something. And you're going to have all these amazing stories from all that time that you spent for that company. Hard as Pepsi was sometimes, I'm grateful for that experience. Whenever I got over to McKesson, and it's a little less complex than what I was used to at Pepsi, because I went from operations to finance. It's considerably smaller than what I was doing. It felt like it was easy for me to make the transition and meet my goals. Honestly, sometimes I felt like a superhero because I had gone through all of this stuff at Pepsi. I had learned how to overcome some pretty amazing things at Pepsi and worked with a lot of people. And then by the time I moved on, it was much easier to transition into this. The ramp up into this was much easier than my day-to-day in my old job. But I'm grateful for it. I'm grateful for it because it really stretched me and built my skills, taught me patience, taught me the value of partnerships. And now I feel like I'm a very valuable contributor. I feel like I'm worthy of my team. I can support them the way they deserve to be supported.
I feel like the best experiences that we have forge us into the people that we need to be to move forward, right? Even if it's not with the organization that built us up. I'm really glad to hear that you have come to that conclusion. It's definitely easier when you've had a positive new job to fit in at, right?
Sure. And maybe it's a career change, right? I know people who started doing podcasts and that grew into a career change for them. So it doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing. It's time for a change in your life. You need change, right? You got to have change or you get stale.
Change management of a different kind.
Yes.
And in this case, someone else approved the change, but you did the implementation.
Yes.
I remember we talked about how you noticed the stress level go way down after that event happened, and you had some time to reflect on that.
I did. So I was very stressed for the 4 days that I was still at PepsiCo. Part of me felt so sorry for my team. My offshore team remained, and I had built those relationships with them. My support lead took a day off to deal with the news. He called me on WhatsApp, video conference with his wife, who I had kind of gotten to know because she would be there whenever we had our meetings. And I could tell he was very upset. Possibly he had been crying. And his wife said, he's so upset that you're gone. And I said, I'm humbled that I had that kind of effect on you, but I believe you're going to be in good hands. And even if you're not, I believe in you. And I know that you can do this. And anytime you need me, you can always call me and I'll be there. And I still have a relationship with him and his wife. Only now we're friends, we share each other's life victories. He's always like saying, hey, I'm so glad to see you happy and running around Las Vegas. I was there for a conference. I think it was last week or the week before. And he was like, have a great time, So we still talk. He'll send me pictures of his family singing around a campfire. So I'm really happy to still have that. And I'm glad that I was able to stay positive, even though I was so stressed those 4 days for the team. They all immediately reached out. As soon as I was on LinkedIn, they all connected with me. And some of them still will say things like, oh, I would love to work for you again. So if the opportunity ever arises, I will be so excited if I ever work for you again. And that's great. When you're gone and they no longer have to care what you think about them, for them to say things like that, or for them to call you and say, hey, I'm in charge of that area that you used to be in charge of. And I always ask myself, what would Marni do? And I'm like, I'm really, really just so touched that they thought that highly of me. It made me feel like I did it right, to the end. I did it right. Didn't badmouth the company, even though I was hurting and I was feeling rejected. I didn't do that. I was still there for them in the way I always wanted to be. And I was immediately, I think it was a day or two after, the next day I woke up and I didn't have to get up to an alarm. I had my last day and I think that weekend was normal, but then that first Monday, I didn't have to get up to an alarm. I just felt a weight fall off my shoulders. And I realized I was getting up every day wondering, what am I going to have to resolve today? What do I need to get on top of today? And I was already ready for the day. I was like suited up with armor the minute I got out of bed in the morning. And this was the first day I didn't have to do that. So I enjoyed that time. I'm not a person who can just sit around and do nothing most of the time, but I took the time to re-energize and to do things for myself. So I started to feel like myself again and didn't realize how long it had been since I felt relaxed and felt like I was just able to just be myself and enjoy life. I did not realize how stressful it was until I wasn't doing it anymore. So if you get laid off and you're in that in-between time, if you've got an option to give yourself a week or two just to reset, I think it's so important. Take time to notice those things. Take time to say, wow, I was really stressed. Maybe that wasn't the right place for me. And the next place I go, it's going to be different. For me, it was.
I want to make sure that I understand something. and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, it sounds like some of the stress was being caused by the fact that maybe somewhere above in your chain of command, way up there, they had made the decision already, or were thinking about this decision of these roles are going away, or this is all going offshore. So the things that you were asking for or trying to do or trying to initiate were being maybe going into the ether, or you weren't getting the feedback that you needed. And so that disconnect between what you felt needed to be done and the organization's response was part of the cause of that stress. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think it was. I think that not knowing that I was going to be impacted and thinking that I was still going to be there and wanting to make it better and trying to make it better, and it's still like we weren't really being empowered to move forward with some of these things, was stressful. Like I said, when you're in the middle of that, you don't realize it. I mean, we were in ops, so it was constantly moving. We were very busy. We were kind of the center of everything because we weren't your typical ops team. We were the people who knew everybody. So if they came to us and it wasn't our job, we didn't say, oh yeah, that's not us. Good luck. We would say, oh yeah, you know what? We don't do that, but let me reach out to this person. I'm going to copy them here. Hey, do you know who we can talk to about this problem they're having? And eventually we would find out who could help them because we didn't drop people. We were at the center. So we very much, the whole team, this wasn't just me. I worked with exceptional, smart people, and they went above and beyond for that customer experience and that employee experience. And they really wanted to make it better. We cared. It was our company, not the company, our company. And we had accomplished all these things together. We were family, and we weren't anymore after that. We still have that strong relationship. I just talked to my former manager 2 days ago, and I still talk to people who worked for me at Pepsi and people I worked with at Pepsi. And I would say our bond is even stronger now. I thought I was going to lose that, but it only got stronger. So I'm happy for that. But yeah, to your point, not being able to make it better for not only my employees, but the other employees, because I felt like I wasn't getting the go ahead to do things. That was part of the stress at the end. Suddenly, that not being something I had to figure out. I mean, while I still worried about the people who were still there, and I still wanted it to be better for them, I knew it wasn't my responsibility anymore. So I didn't have to suit up to go in there and find a way to make it better. And I think it's important to give yourself that time. And you don't have to feel guilty about that. You didn't make that decision. You would still be there if the decision hadn't been made, wearing your armor for your people. But once they made that decision for you, you don't have to feel guilty about not being able to do it anymore. You don't have to feel guilty about having to move on to your next place and do what's right for you.
They've given you permission to move on emotionally, basically.
Yeah, I think my senior director, it was tough for him. We were all very upset having been so close together. I could tell it impacted him having to tell us. But he did say in that final meeting that we had with HR, take time for you. It is okay to take time for you. You don't have to do anything these last 3 days. I still did. Up until the time that I couldn't log into the system anymore, I still did. And if they ever called me, I was there. It was no longer my responsibility, so it was a whole lot less stressful to just help them. But I felt a huge release.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, chills.
So many mic drop moments in this conversation. Listen, Marni, I want to say thank you for being a guest on the show and for being so open and vulnerable and sharing your story. We applaud you for doing that, and we're very excited for what you're doing now at McKesson with your team, and we'll look forward to following up on your progress.
Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it, and I've had a great time.
We don't call it out specifically in the discussion with Marni, but there's a very clear sense of duty from a people leader, people manager perspective here. She was told by her senior director that she didn't have to do anything else for those last few days, but she wanted to be there to support her team all the way till the end. She felt a responsibility to do it right, as she said, all the way until her systems access was turned off. I think this is an extension of the phrase, you work for them, they don't work for you, as a people leader. And this is another pattern of good managers. They continue to work for their team and care about their team even when it's difficult. In Marni's case, she was on the way out, but she continued to love them and care for them just as she had before, even though it was very difficult on her to be able to do that. There's another aspect here. This sense of duty is a weight on the people leader or people manager. And she mentions if you're told that you no longer have that job anymore, you don't have to feel guilty because it's not your job anymore to care about that team in the way you did before. You can certainly still care about those people as human beings and continue to have relationships with them, but it's not the same as it once was. You don't have a duty to fulfill as the people leader of that team any longer, but you can take care of yourself, and that's okay. Because even leaders, the good ones, who care for us, keep us safe, deal with things that we probably are never going to know about. They're human beings. They need time to recharge. They need to recover. They need self-care. And Marni definitely told us she took time for herself and was glad that she did because it helped her recharge for what was next. I liked what Marni said about the interview process being really a series of good conversations. Have you ever been able to approach an interview like that? It's just a good conversation with someone on the other side who's trying to get to know you. You're trying to get to know them, what they're like, what kind of leader they would be or teammate they would be, what it's like to work for this company. Don't forget, dear listeners, hopefully you heard the call out. Marni emphasizes the need to know our stories. We need to have stories to tell in those interviews. And the only way we're going to be able to have those stories to tell is if we document our accomplishments. And she encourages us to document far more than what we can put on a resume. We need to know what our skills are and the accomplishments that we've had over time on our own and in working with others. If you're looking for some other perspectives on the interview process, here are a few recommended episodes to go back and listen to. In episode 265, Sean Talram told us about how to make connections and foster them through the process of interviewing. Brett Hill, in episode 192, shared how to use mindfulness as a way to create connection and perform better in an interview. Manny Sidhu, all the way back in episode 81, he talked about how much he enjoys interviews and all the things that he learns from being interviewed and being an interviewer. And then, of course, John and I did a series on the foundations of job interviews in episode 205 and 206 about the different types of interviews that you might experience through an average hiring process, which, of course, can differ based on the company and the hiring manager. I hope you enjoyed this trilogy. It was a great discussion with Marni, and we thank her so much for being willing to tell that story. We'll see you next week.
Farewell, listeners. Tune in next time as the journey continues. I'm John White at VJourneyman, for Nick Cordy at NetworkNerd_, signing off.
Adios.